Robert, a huge theme of our conversation today has been crime and how it's resonating with voters here. You did a poll on safety in America, and a question that you asked likely voters was, do you feel as safe in America today as you did 2 years ago? So 47.8% of Democrats answered yes, and 86.8% of Republicans answered no. So why is there such a disconnect here between Democrats and Republicans?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people in this day and age are answering questions through a partisan perspective. You know, when your party's in charge and you're a Democrat, you might not feel so safe, but my gosh, you don't want to tell everybody that. And so I think a lot of the Democrats that are answering that poll are probably not being completely straightforward. But the fact is, the majority of people in America, and you saw how the independents much more aligned with Republicans on that. The majority do not feel as safe, and in reality, no one would argue, not rationally, that it is not that it is safer today than it was a couple of years ago, because there's just no one's going to argue that. But now there's going to be a lot of debate about what the blame is for that. And I think that a lot of Democrats answering that poll are anticipating the blame for that. But I think that what you're going to find is that people have seen what's going on, and from whether it was defund the police or whether it was just the way the police have kind of backed off, because of all the attention and lawsuits and the feeling that so many of the public have been demonizing them. And, it's a tough job. There's no question. It's a tough job being a policeman. And when a policeman does something that's wrong, and certainly something on purpose is wrong, no one has any time for that, and no one wants to tolerate that. But right now, some police are just being a little hesitant, and when you have a job like that, a little bit of hesitation, you know, people get killed when they do that. When police hesitate to do their job in Texas, children die. So I mean, there is this feeling that some of the attacks on the police have led to some of that hesitation, and so there's a real feeling that this has been brought about, that this is artificial. And certainly with these quote unquote reforms of cashless bail, have had a tremendous impact. And, a message of arrest people who have broken the law, prosecute the ones that are guilty, convict the ones that are guilty, put them in jail, and keep them in jail. That does not seem controversial to most people, and yet a lot of people in the Democratic Party think that's a controversial thing to say.
Republicans have been united in their messaging of blaming President Biden and Democratic lawmakers for things like crime, like we were talking about, inflation, and the border. And Democrats have been campaigning on a different message of women's rights, as well as Congress's legislative successes, and a fight against what they describe as extreme MAGA lawmakers. What do you see that is resonating more with voters? The issue of crime?
But don't forget climate change, which doesn't actually make the top five in any poll when people are talking about the things that they're voting on. But yet it's a fundamental basis of the Democrat Party's platform. And what they've been focusing on. No, I think that's exactly right, is what you see, and this is what we're getting all the time. And this has been a problem. It's not this big highbrow conversation of the role of government, but what it is people are saying, the things I want my government to do: keep me safe in my home, protect the country's borders, don't let a bunch of people who are going to harm me, drugs that are going to harm my kids, don't let that stuff in the country. Make sure that we have a functioning economy and a functioning supply chain. Do what you can with monetary policy and with spending policy to make sure that inflation is not out of control and I can afford my groceries. This is what they want their government to do. What they see their government doing is fixated on climate change, fixated on abortion, fixated on transgender rights, fixated on all kind of things that they don't think are important. that are not on the Americans' top agenda. And so they see the government doing all kind of things they don't want the government to do, and the government completely ignoring the things that they do want the government to do. And it leads to a massive disconnect. And so, what I've always noticed is that the Democratic Party, especially, and the left movement, was very smart. For like 20 or 30 years, they were engaged in what we would call incrementalism, make the changes they wanted a little step at a time to where it didn't seem like a radical change. And then all of a sudden, after 2020, and a very close election, both, the Senate was 50-50, a House down, 5 or 6 votes, and a presidential race that came down to like 5 cities. So no mandate by any means. And then all of a sudden, they just abandoned incrementalism and went for everything at once without having the kind of legislative majority that had them with 60 members of the Senate, and almost this massive amount of votes in the House, like an FDR kind of majority. And it didn't make any sense. It's like they went for too much too fast, and they're paying a price for it. They revealed the agenda that should have been probably kept quiet for another 10 years as they work their way there.
So
And it was too much.
what I'm hearing from you is that voters are resonating this election more with the Republican message. But do you think
Or Republican issues, not necessarily message. I wouldn't give the Republican Party credit for messaging well. What I would say is the Democratic Party is messaging so badly that the Republican alternative is attractive.